Okay. Oh, Sagoli Swagwake. Wagadun Hahe. Greetings to all of you. And I'm Wagadun Hahe. I'm so glad to see so many people here and interested. And it sounds like future topics are pretty interesting too. Wow. What a difference. So I say, Ganiganolu Niyongwats. Atnawal. Niwagita Loda. Onyu Deag. Nehodan Shoni. Okale Mahikanu. Okale Montauk. Ganiganolu is my name in Oneida, and it means a little bit of water. The water is precious. And I'm of the Turtle Clan. Oh, I forgot to use it, didn't I? I'm of the Turtle Clan. The Oneida Nation has 3 clans, Turtle, Bear, and Wolf, and I'm Turtle Clan. And the Oneida Nation is part of what we call ourselves the Haudenosaunee, but you would have read about this as the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Six Nations. The French called us the Iroquois, and the British called us the Six Nations. And I'm also Mahikanu, which became known in Wisconsin as Stockbridge, Muncie. And that means the Mahikanu, the people who live by the waters are never still. And that was the Hudson River. And there's the Brothertown Nation. There were 7 nations along the coast and Long Island that were so decimated by disease and war that they joined together and became the Brothertown. And one of those nations is the Montauk, way on the end of Long Island, way at the very end. That's where the Montauk live. And I interviewed, June Eswald was their chairperson for years and years, and I interviewed her, and she sent me a genealogy from 1600 in the Fowler family, and I'm going through this, and finally I started getting bored. I flipped to 1900. There's my grandma. That's how I know about the Montauk part. I think she called it, "Where did all the Montauks go?" But they have that generation by generation for so long. It's just amazing. So I represent 3 of the nations that moved here. We're originally from New York State, and we were moved here in the 1820s. Into the well, let me go to the map. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay. I guess first I'll come back to that. Indigenous voices. It shows up there, or not up there? There it is. Okay. What got me going into this research of what did the U.S. government lumped us together as the New York Indians, and this is Menominee and Ho-Chunk land, and what did our ancestors say to each other? And I thought I was going to find a lot of fights and horrible stuff. No, our people are so polite. I just thought once in a while, get your dander up, come on here. No, they were polite. I only found one little instance, and that person was told to sit down and shut up. So a lot of things. But what I would find is people who wrote about us and researched us all of these years, and there would be one sentence, Daniel Bread said. Well, what else did Daniel Bread say? He's an Oneida chief. Or a Menominee chief said, Chief Oshkosh said. What else did they say? And to the footnote, and okay, from the footnote to a journal, to a Senate document, to the microfilm where it was all copied, and gathering all of that information and pulling it together. And I didn't realize what I had. First of all, I didn't think I'd find much of anything, but people wrote it down. Some treaties, there's no record at all, just the treaty. And other ones, there's detailed reports from people. So I wanted to hear the voices of our ancestors, so I spent about 10 years. Thank goodness for footnotes, is what I say. And I was real careful about the footnotes in my book. Our Loretta Metoxen, our Oneida historian, she just passed not too long ago, but she was my hero. And she'd come in go to meetings, and she comes stomping in. Land, land, it's all about land. And we have to calm her down, go listen to what had riled her up. But she's said that over and over again. And as I did this research, it's right. She was right. It's all about land. All of these treaties that were made with the United States, it's all to get our land. Even that politeness in there, but it had a knife in there to get the land. There were Indian nation to Indian nation treaties made in 1821 and 1822 and 1825. And that was between us, New York Indians, and 1821 was with Ho-Chunk and the Menominee. And then the 1822 was just with New York Indians and the Menominee. And it was to share land. We wound up in quite a controversy. The United States Constitution, Article 6, second paragraph. The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And a big part of the controversy up north, the big fishing one years back, is that was because no one ever read a treaty. They didn't know. The Constitution says it's the supreme law of the land for these treaties. So it was really important to find the treaties and then the reports, the journals that went with them. And I used to carry a little pocket-sized Constitution around because you'd have people who would look at me and go, so, here, read it.
I still carry mine.
Yeah, good for you. Because people just don't believe it. And why weren't we taught that? Why weren't all of this? That's the question I get from audiences over and over again. Why didn't we know this? As a result of the fishing controversy up north, the state of Wisconsin passed a law. And that law says that, it's called Act 31, that within Wisconsin public schools, that Wisconsin Indian history, culture, and sovereignty shall be taught twice at the elementary and once at the high school level. And that went into effect about 1992. Come on in. And I have students today I do elder hours at UWGB, so I get to meet with these freshmen just getting into college and give them a good experience. But I asked them, were you taught? Very rare is it that someone had that spark plug teacher that wanted to know this and made an effort to learn it. So it's a very important thing to learn all of these things. The United States Indian removal policy was passed in 1830. And the goal was to move all Indians with the United States, all Indians, I can go by my map here already. We got the Mississippi going down along here. They wanted all Indians west of the Mississippi, and that would be Indian territory. And they called it Indian territory for a long, long time. You'll find that terminology. And that was their official act in 1830. However, they had already started removing us in the 1820s. And even after all of these treaties, they continued to try to remove us. The brother town are not recognized as Indian people. Although they still meet, I've gone to their tribal council meetings and met with them. Oh, they're just fantastic. It's like relatives, like aunties and uncles. But in 1839, the threat of removal was so strong, and they'd been removed so many times already, that they thought that if they became U.S. citizens, then they wouldn't get removed again. But, yeah, they were no longer recognized as a native nation. And they're still trying to get that overturned. That's how I got into that big genealogy piece with June Eswell from up there. Here's the map where, what's writing a land acknowledgement? You're telling me about that? This is before any settlers came here. The Winnebago, the Menominee, the Sioux, the Iowa, the Illinois. Don't know of any Illinois that exist anymore. But I hesitate to say that because there's the last of the Mohican in the Stockbridge are the Mohican. And one time I was in New York City at a presentation with the Taino man, who they're supposed to be the first people Columbus met, and they're extinct. So when he got done talking and I walked up for mine, I shook his hand and said, "From one extinct people to another, glad to meet you." So you never know. But that's what this looked like before. This one, can you see that real good? The stripes going down this way, that's all, to the north, that's all Ojibwe and Chippewa lands. The stripes going straight up and down, that was all Menominee land. The solid black, that was the Ho-Chunk lands. The white pieces are Potawatomi, and the stripes going that way were Siouan people. And this is in the early 1800s. So there's a lot of it. It's all about the land. This is what's left. And you can see on this is a free map you can get. I know they got piles of them up at the university, and I just took one to show the current reservations. So here's Oneida, and I live way down here on this end, and here's Waupaca. So I came across on S. That was a real good drive. The Stockbridge side is up here. And my grandma and grandpa and my sisters live up there yet at Stockbridge, and they got a quarter of the Menominee land. So we got 2 townships in that treaty. And this is the Ho-Chunk lands, and they don't have a solid reservation because they were removed so many times. If you really want to go into something in depth, look at the Ho-Chunk history. It'll break your heart. They put them on railroad cars and shipped them to Nebraska. It's just, and they do have an office out there, some stayed out there. But they came back, and under the Homestead Act, they got little pieces of land. And that's what they have today. Strong, strong people. And all of these up here are Ojibwe. And then there's Mole Lake. That's it's Forest County, Potawatomi. There you go, Forest County, Potawatomi. Remember their lands were down here? So that's why they can have a casino in Milwaukee, because that's on their Aboriginal lands. The Menominees try to push that a little bit sometimes, and because they want to have one there too. But that's, you can see what Loretta said, land, it's all about land. And there's the little pieces that are left. This one, there's this stereotype that because it wasn't well occupied, in the Atlas of Great Lakes Indians, you'll have to find, it's a big book. I think her name is Turner, who did that one in 1910s, 30s, somewhere in there. But she did maps of the Great Lakes Indians all the way across. And there's villages. Here you can see there's Menominee villages. Up here, Old King Village, and it tells you how many people live there. Peshtigo, Okano, Old King, Sandpoint, all the way up there and down all the way to the Ho-Chunk villages. And then when you get down towards Lake Winnebago, there's a combination of Ho-Chunk and Menominee villages. But there's, the Menominees did a project with UW Stevens Point. And if you Google Menominee creation story, it will come up, and the creation story is there, the clan story is there, and then there's a map. And that map shows, this is just a few villages. There's a ton of villages all the way up, going up towards Marinette. And Not only that, the Menominee people still knew the names of those villages in Menominee language. So they documented all of that. That just blew my mind when I saw that. But there, when folks came this way, it was occupied. There's just no way around that. Here's another one with villages in 1820. Whoop, did I go too fast? Yeah. Another one that shows some of the villages. And this map is not real correct at all, because the Oneidas weren't, in 1820, we were not there. We weren't even, we're talking about moving here at that point. So you have to kind of know the history to pick that out. And the Mohican are down towards Grand Chute, and they weren't here yet either. But it's a sense of the Menominee villages going up to, all the way up there. And that's what I was looking at, the documentation. Oh, I'm going too fast here. Okay, we talked about Indian Nation to Indian Nation treaties. In 1820, there was a Colonel Bauer. He was the Indian agent for the Menominees, and he did a treaty with them that would take all of their land. And it was real controversial because he didn't get the right people. It's like if I signed a treaty for the whole United States, and I'm not authorized to do that. You know, because that kind of thing happened a lot with treaties. Even one where they told them, the Menominee, you don't seem to have one leader. You pick one leader or we will appoint one for you. And they did. They did. So this is a Menominee statement about that 1820 treaty. We were kind of coming on our way to Wisconsin at that point to meet with them, and we got as far as Detroit and we were told the land's gone. That this Bauer did this, so that we didn't want to come any farther. But this is what the Menominee statement, and this is the kind of thing that I looked for. What did they say? I was so tickled to find this one. And we disapprove of what has been done by the agent and of the conduct of those of our nation who treated with him and sold our lands without our consent. Now, all those villages I was showing you, they had a chief in each of those villages. And when the Menominees were making a treaty, each of those villages had to be there. They didn't have just one chief who could sign stuff. Everybody had to come to consensus. And the U.S. didn't like that. That's what they didn't recognize that form of government at all. So that's why they would appoint people, or they would select somebody who was favorable to them and say, you can sign the treaty. So this is what the Menominees are protesting here. They were informed that Mr. Williams, with a number of the chiefs of the Six Nations, were on their way to Green Bay to look for a place of settlement for themselves and such others of their tribes as might be disposed to migrate and settle with them. I got an extra piece on here. Should they be pleased with the country, they asked, will they, I don't know what's going on with here. Will they obtain lands for their brothers? It says, we have been informed on good authority that the lands at Green Bay, which we hope to obtain, have been, I got two different things going on here, sorry. On here I got Menominee statement, and over here I got the New York Indian ones. Okay, he says in here, Father, in regard to the delegates from the Six Nations, we have no enemies. We are ready to give them our hand. But in regard to selling them land, we know not what to say. Our territory is so small. Father, I listen, this is the polite thing here. I listen always to what the white people say and want to do as some of our don't want to do what some of our foolish people have done. I do not want to take on myself or to have those with me of the disposition to steal a piece of land. There he's alluding to that 1819 treaty. But if all our nation were together, we would know what to do. So he's telling the government, we make decisions together. We reach consensus. We reach agreement on this. And that wasn't done. So they're protesting. And that treaty was never ratified. So our reply, now let's see if this is going to do this. Am I not pushing? There we go. The New York Indians replied that when they came, let's see, second parent, we have been informed on good authority that the lands at Green Bay, which we hope to obtain, have been purchased by the Great Father's agent at that place. We shall expect that you, Father, and our Great Father, the President of the United States, will remove these obstacles out of the way, that your children may get quiet possession of the land which they have been encouraged to expect. Father, we wish peace. We wish to obtain a place to get our foot on peaceably and to live in friendship with our brothers of the West and our Great Father, the President. So polite. You promised us this piece of land. We come out and it's gone already. Your agent did this. And they're very polite and restrained. Sometimes I have to learn from that. I have to remember that. Okay. In the 1821 treaty was between the Menominee and Winnebago and the Brothertown, Muncie, Oneida, Stockbridge, and other New York Indians. There were others. There were some Seneca, some Cayuga, different ones who would send a delegate once in a while, but they decided they weren't coming out here. So on August 18th, 1821, we agreed to share a piece of land. Here's the boundaries in that 1821 treaty. Okay, put your best map on in your head. See if you can figure out where this is. Beginning at the foot of the rapid of the Fox River, usually called the Grand Cacklen, then up said river to the rapids at Winnebago Lake, and from the river extending back in this width on each side to the northwest and to northeast, equidistant with the lands claimed by the said Menominee and Winnebago Nation of Indians.
That's got to be a politician.
There's a few variables missing in there. And most of the treaties are like that. They're really hard to, you know what I do when I'm teaching on our treaties? I give the students a blank map of Wisconsin, kind of like this. A few boundaries, where's Grand Cacklen and that kind of thing. And I tell them, draw it, tell me where the boundaries are. And after about 10 minutes or so, they're so frustrated. They'll say, you can't. And I said, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point. That the boundaries are not clear. And that gets discussed in later treaties. But in Article 2, the Menominee and Winnebago shall reserve to themselves the right to occupy a necessary proportion of the lands hereby ceded for the purpose of hunting and also the right of fishing. And that's something you'll find in almost every treaty. And there's this notion that the United States gave Indians land to settle on. That's not true. Here was our land, and we gave most of it away, but we reserved this area for ourselves. And they always did that. They reserved land for themselves, and that hunt, fish, and gather in the ceded territory. Because this is our whole piece of land, and we got this little corner left. And there's not many deer that can survive in that little area. And that's always, that's why we wanted people to read treaties, to see this is in there. On September 23rd, 1822, we did another treaty with the Menominee. And here we had, and it just says the number of people there. Stockbridge, Mohicanut, or Stockbridge were 4 people. Oneida, First Christian Party of Oneida. There, I got to take a step back. Eleazar Williams, first Kirkland was there and Christianizing people. by the American Revolution time. And then after that, here comes Eliezer Williams. And his papers are up in archives on, at UWGB. Oh, and by the way, that Bower Treaty, all the people where I read about that this existed, finally somebody says, it's lost to antiquity. I found it. It's at UWGB, it's up in the Eliezer Williams papers. But in those papers, what he did was he says that, what was it, like 85% of the Oneidas were pagans when he got there. And just a few weeks later, over half of them were Christian now. And then he was getting more. And what he did was he appealed to the younger people. And I know if this is a generational thing, I kind of think the younger people were willing to listen to him, and the older people said, no, we're not leaving, we're staying here. So the group that came with him was called the First Christian Party. And growing up, we were taught that the Oneidas became Christians and they followed Eliezer Williams and came here. Well, old Eliezer there, he got paid by the Ogden Land Company, New York State, and the United States government to remove us. And his bills, his invoices are up at GB in those papers. So, and it's been really hard with some of the older people in our community for me to tell them, no, he wasn't that great guy. Didn't you think he was? Wow. So just the First Christian Party came. And when the next group came, they were called the Second Christian Party. And then the third party that came, they were called the Pagan Party. And they were the ones who kept the traditions and the language and everything alive. And the Second Christian Party became also called the Orchard Party. And I don't know why that change in name. So this whole thing about removal divided us. Not only Oneida Nation, many nations. Stockbridge had the Citizens Party and their pagan party. So it did that to all Native nations. Tuscarora, there's one person, Eliezer Williams, said he represented the St. Regis, the Mohawk. I'd yet to find any document that says the Mohawks approved him to do this. They didn't. He just said that's who he was. Because later on he said he was the lost dolphin of France, too. Yeah, he was kind of out there. And people saw it. People documented it. They had much laughter after talking with him. The Munsee Nation, one representative, and then the chiefs and headmen of the Menominee Nation. Okay, Article 2 says the Stockbridge, Oneida, Tuscarora, St. Regis, and Munsee nations aforesaid do promise and agree to and with the said Menominees that they, the said Menominees, shall have the free permission and privilege of occupying and residing upon the lands hereby ceded in common with them. You got ceded and in common with them in the same sentence. And the way we all understood it, that was, we're sharing. And that was about 4 or 5 million acres of land. So that becomes the controversy. The Menominee thought they signed a treaty to share the land with us. New York Indians thought they had purchased the land. And on the New York Indians side, they were told by New York State government, United States government, that they were going to come out and buy land. I mean, that was just perfect what they were told, and that's what they believed had happened. And of course, when these treaties were written, they didn't write them. There was Fort Howard, soldiers there, and those are the guys who wrote the stuff down. So the understanding wasn't the same there. So the Indian treaties of 1821 and 1822 were signed by they were Indian nation to Indian nation treaties, and President Monroe signed them he approved of them. And the law of the nation here with the Constitution is that treaties have to go through Congress before they go to the president. And they asked him about that, and he said, well, these are Indian nation to Indian nation treaties. They don't need to go to Congress. So he signed them. That becomes a controversy too later on, a big one, whether they were legitimate or not. And then in 1825, there's another, I talked about that kindness. In these other treaties that we just saw, the Brothertown weren't listed as the people, as being involved in those treaties. So in 1825, the Oneida and the Stockbridge had a treaty with the Brothertown, and part of that land they got from the Menomonies, they said to the Brothertown, this will be your area, because you weren't involved in the other ones. And then they had to pay $950 to the Menominee for that. So they were providing, making sure everybody was provided for. In 1824, the Menominees write a letter to the Secretary of War. They are upset. And they did a petition saying that when the New York Indians, or Nottaways, that's what they called New York Indians, first came to this country, they asked the Menominees to sell them a small piece of their lands. That the Menominees replied to them they had no land to sell, that their country was already too small for their numbers, and that they were themselves compelled to hunt upon other Indians' lands. That, notwithstanding this answer, the Nottaways held a treaty with some of the men of the Menominee Nation, at which none of the principal chiefs attended, and purchased or pretended to purchase a part of the Menominees' country, the boundaries of which they knew nothing about. Fraud, coercion, yeah. Is that where I want to go? That's what's next up here. I was going somewhere else. Those treaties now, after 1825 treaty, after that treaties were made with the United States or New York State. There were no longer Indian nation to Indian nation treaties, so they did have to go through Congress. And in 1825, the president says, all these tribes here in Wisconsin, they're all fighting with each other. So we want you to come together at Perdochin. We're going to make a treaty and define your boundaries so you aren't fighting with each other. There wasn't much fighting going on to begin with. But it was an excuse to define boundaries so they knew who to make treaties with. And it was kind of pretty much a foreign concept. In 1827, they did this same thing again because they couldn't define the Menominee lands definitively, you want to maybe say, because of the treaties they made with the New York Indians. So they kept putting it off. And that's kind of what happened in 1827. And what they decided, they couldn't solve that, so then they should go to the president. The President of the United States. Well, I got another one. The New York Indians, let's go. They were astonished that these same lands that they bought in 1821 and 1822 had been totally ignored, and the United States was now saying they bought it again without any input. They weren't even invited to those treaties. And when they did go and they submitted documents. This is the Secretary of War approving those type of things. They kept doing those. This purchase of our lands was made not only without our consent and contrary to our most earnest wishes, but also without even consulting us at all. We were not allowed a hearing, nor even asked whether we would consent to sell or not. I'd quit being polite at that point, I think. In 1829, they wrote a petition to the Secretary of War, and demanded that, hey, we need to talk about this. Because in the 1827 treaty, they said that it was going to leave it to the president to decide this. So they did a petition. So in 1830, the United States president sends out 3 commissioners and tells them, you solve this problem. You define the boundaries with these nations. And they came in August 24th to September 1st, so it wasn't a one-day meeting. This went on. And everybody involved in it presented different boundaries, and they couldn't agree on anybody's. And John Quinney from the Stockbridge represented, it's 32 pages long. It's in the book. I debated about that, and I said, people don't have access to this. Put it in the book, so it's in there. But he did philosophical, theological, justified all kinds of concepts saying why they took the land illegally and they shouldn't take that land. And this was ours, and we needed a place to be. So it's in the book. So now we have no decisions. Well, now we got 2 more treaties, 1831 and 1832, with the Menominees. And with the Menominees, they, if I can put it on the map there, they said, we'll give the New York Indians 500,000 acres up here. And then the New York Indians said, well, we're agricultural people. We want land down here in the Fox River Valley. So Smith White got 2 treaties. They had to discuss all of that. And in that treaty is where the government recognized the Stockbridge and the brother town. And there's 2 townships for the Stockbridge and 1 for the brother town. So that's what happened in those treaties. They got pretty owly with each other, arguing about that. And the removal policy of the United States continues and continues and continues. In 1836, this Indian agent, Sudan, his name was, he made treaties with the Oneida. It's like he had a boilerplate document, and he put Oneidas on this one, and you're going to move to Missouri, and you're going to have so many years to go there, and you're going to get some money while you're there, and you're going to get this acres of land. Next page. The Stockbridge now, you're going to do the same thing. And they were boilerplate treaties. And definite removal. So you can see how that threat was constantly there. And why the brother town would think, maybe if we're citizens, we won't get removed again. So, but his treaties were never ratified. He just did that on his own. In 1838, the United States government did a treaty at Buffalo Creek on January 15th, and each of the nations in the Confederacy, the whole Iroquois Confederacy is listed. You will move to Missouri and you have 1 year and you'll get this much money to move and money to support you for a year. And the kind of the little hook in it was that once you get there, then you can have your own government and your own laws, run your own business. That was kind of, I thought that might appeal to people to do that. But 6 nations didn't go. They just, there's a treaty, but they said, no, we're not moving, and they didn't. 2 weeks later, in 1838, on February 3rd, the Oneidas went to Washington. They're getting really sharp about all of this confusion and manipulation. So 2 weeks after that Buffalo Creek Treaty, they went to Washington and got our own treaty. And that's the one we have today. They gave up that 500,000 acres for 65,400 acres. And that's the boundaries of our current reservation. There are 654 Oneidas here in Wisconsin, times 100 acres. But it wasn't allotted. We still held it in common. As Indian lands are held, you'll hear that kind of terminology in different places. So the threat goes on and on with this. These are the Menominee treaties. How are we doing on time? Oh, about time. I'm just going to do these real briefly to show you the extent of the Menominee. They tried to put the Menominees moving to Minnesota. And the chief said, well, we better go look at this piece of land you want us to go to. And they came back and said, we're not moving. And they didn't. And eventually, after treaty, the Menominee Reservation, as it is today, was 270,000 acres in 1854. And yet, of that, the 2 townships in 1856 were given to the Stockbridge. And that's a kind of a funny thing, because there are people still today, I grew up hearing this, Menominee saying to Stockbridgers, you never paid us for that land. Especially after midnight when they were they'd go outside to argue about it. And as I'm going along here, I'm finding the receipts that the Menominee chief signed. I'll put them in the book. I said, for somehow we're going to take care of that misnomer there. So Stockbridge too have a whole series of treaties. In 1843, they find this, what is it called? An act for the relief of the Stockbridge tribe of Indians in the territory of Wisconsin. It allotted their land, changed their government to an elected system, made them citizens, and they were terminated, all in one act. And they protested it, and it took 3 years to turn that around. But then you had these arguments of whose land was allotted and whose wasn't, and who owned what land, and who was the citizen party, and who was going to move. And wow, I did have a great aunt in this all this removal stuff who did move out to I think Missouri, because I remember Auntie would talk about going out to see her. I never met her. In the Oneida documents, I find there's journals in the mid-1800s, and they'll say that such and such a family returned from Missouri today, or returned from Oklahoma. So they were going out there, but they were coming back. So we do have some out there, out that way. Oneidas don't have any that stayed out there. The whole chunk. This is the one where I told you, this is just breaks your heart to read this. Treaty after treaty after treaty. And they moved them. There is a map. I don't think I have it though. There is a map of all of their movements. This is another whole page of movements. No, I don't have it. They moved them up into the Dakotas in the wintertime. And they said, we can't live here. We can't. And so they did their own Trail of Tears going then down into Nebraska. And they lost hundreds of people during that time. In the meantime, they're putting them on train tracks, on the train cars, and shipping them down there. So, but they come back. You know, I said, Winnebagos, whole chunks, they come home. And they did. The Brothertown Nation, as I said, they continue to meet as a nation. The last time they've been at this, since the 1970s, they're trying to get recognized again as a nation, and they keep getting turned down for this reason or that reason. And finally, this last time, it took them 20 years to decide that only Congress can recognize them as a nation. So they could have told us that 20 years ago. You know? So that's the next step now, is to get congressional action. And it's not a real good time to go in Congress right now. It's one of our guys that used to always said, let's not go to the Supreme Court right now. Not right. And I just thought he was chicken. I said, go for it. Now I understand about the Supreme Court. And there's a book called In the Courts of the Conqueror. And it's the 10 worst Supreme Court cases decided on Native people. I'm about halfway through it, and it's just astounding. I thought I knew a lot. But boy, there's a lot more to each of those treaties and those congressional acts and Supreme Court cases.